Somebody shouted, "Fire!" And immediately my attention was drawn from the television program I'd been watching, and I realized that there was a smell of smoke subtly in the air. Immediately, my friend Dan and I got up and we ran to the back door. I put my hand on the doorknob and I turned it. And as I opened the door, I was greeted with a sight that I remember to this day. But before I talk about that, welcome to Reflecting on Truth. I'm Jim Higgins. Thank you for joining me today. If you find this program informative and useful, I hope you'll consider clicking that subscribe button and the little thumbs up button. It'll certainly tell me that the programming that I'm putting out is useful to you. And if you could share it with others, I'd sure appreciate it. Meanwhile, as I opened the door and I looked outside, the sky was gray with the smoke that was billowing from a nearby fire. As I stepped out onto the back porch and I looked to my left, I could see to the north the field that was next to our property was ablaze. The fire had raged up to the fence, was working along the fence by where the horses are, and was getting near an outbuilding. Well, my friend Dan and I, we immediately took action. We grabbed shovels and we went out and we started shoveling dirt trying to put the fire out while the fire department was on the way. Those were exciting times. After the excitement died down, the fire department had arrived and the fire was out. My friend Dan and I had an opportunity to consider what we had just done. Now, you'd have to know something about myself and Dan and our friends. We were what you might call science nerds. We loved learning. We loved trying to apply the principles of science to all kinds of crazy things. And we were just 15 years old. Well, as Dan and I considered that fire, we hatched a plan. We realized that whenever there's a fire, people are put at risk, right? I mean, we're out there shoveling, dirt on the fire, and smoke is raging around us and flames are everywhere. And the firemen, they have to go and they get in there. And so people are injured all the time fighting fires. So Dan and I came up with a brilliant idea. We called it Project Phoenix. Now, Project Phoenix would work like this. We envisioned a missile that would launch a carbon dioxide delivery device into the midst of a fire, where it would explode, covering the fire with all this carbon dioxide and put the fire out. It seemed ingenious to us. So as Dan and I sat in my family's living room and considered this project that we had envisioned, we realized several things. One, we didn't have the supplies to make a missile, but we did have what we needed to create a carbon dioxide delivery device. And so that's exactly what we did. We built a prototype carbon dioxide projectile that would at least demonstrate the proof of concept that you could put out a fire with this thing. And so the next logical step for us was to conduct a pilot test. And I can still remember this like it was yesterday. We decided that the place for our pilot test would be the family barbecue. And we created our carbon dioxide delivery device, which I won't discuss in any detail because I don't want anyone to get hurt, as will become obvious in just a moment. We lit a fire in the barbecue. We placed our carbon dioxide delivery device in the barbecue. And our plan was to stand back a ways and shoot this carbon dioxide delivery device with our BB gun. And so I was standing here, Dan was over on my left a little bit behind me, and he took careful aim and he pulled the trigger and missed. So he took careful aim and pulled the trigger and missed. One more time, he took careful aim, pulled the trigger, and missed. And then Dan said these fateful words, "Let's get closer." And so we did. We got quite a bit closer. This time, Dan took aim and he pulled the trigger. And in my mind's eye, everything slowed down. The breeze that was blowing out of the east. I can see in the corner of my eye off to the left, my oldest sister is just about to step on her horse. She's got the saddle horn and the back of the saddle, and her foot is in the stirrup, and she's just stepping on to her horse. And then I look at the barbecue. And then the barbecue is kind of not there anymore. There was an explosion that blew off the top of the barbecue. And my sister, as I look over to the side, she's hanging off the side of her horse for dear life. And I hear Dan behind me saying, "All right." But as our device deployed, a couple of things happened. First, I felt a slap on my neck. The second thing is I heard Dan, right after he said, "All right," I heard him say, "I'm cut, and I'm cut bad." And so I looked over at Dan and I saw that he had his finger stuck in his shoulder into a hole that had been created there by a piece of shrapnel. And immediately I knew something had to be done. What's a 15-year-old supposed to do? I said, I've got to tell my dad. See, my dad, he worked the night shift at a local cement plant. He was a welder. And he had just gotten home an hour or two before. And so he's finally fallen asleep. And I burst into his room and I'm like, I said, this is exactly what I said. "Dad, we've done it again. We blew up the barbecue and Dan's been hurt." And I'll always remember my dad's first words. He woke up as he jumped out of bed and he said, "You guys are worse than a bunch of animals. I'm going to have to chain you guys up." But he got up and he went outside. He took a look at Dan. He loaded us into his Ford pickup truck and drove us to the hospital, where my mom happened to work as a nurse's aide. Well, it turned out Dan needed some stitches. Several stitches wide, several stitches deep. And it turned out that the piece of glass that hit him had barely missed an artery. And so we're very fortunate there. And I remember going to visit Dan, and my mom came into the room, and her first words that I heard were these: "If I catch you guys mixing anything more powerful than milk over cereal, I'm going to pop your heads like watermelons." Believe it or not, that's what she said. And if you knew Dan and I, you would know that those words, though apparently kind of violent, were not out of place, because our interest in science and our interest in a challenge repeatedly got us into trouble. But our intentions had been noble. Our desire was to help people. But our good intentions went bad. It reminds me of a story in the Bible in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 1 to 14. And this is the story of a man named Saul. Saul was a nobody. He came from a small clan, and God appointed him as king of Israel. And it started out okay. But there came a point in Saul's life when the Israelites were at war with one of their neighbors, and Samuel the prophet had specifically told Saul, "Wait at this place until I come, and we will sacrifice to the Lord, and then you'll be blessed in your endeavor." But to Saul, it seemed like Samuel was taking too long. And so Saul started getting anxious, And the people started getting anxious and they started mumbling and they started drifting away. And Saul thought to himself, I've got to do something. And so he decided on his own that he would offer the sacrifice to the Lord in violation to what he was told to do. And as soon as he did that, Samuel showed up. And through Samuel, God told Saul, you have been rejected. You've been placed into this lofty position with all this responsibility, and you have been given wealth and respect and all of these things, but you've demonstrated that you cannot handle it. And so I reject you as king. I will find someone who will do what I say. And if you're familiar with the stories, things just went from bad to worse for Saul. But Saul had good intentions. He had good intentions. But the point is that our good intentions are meaningless if they fall outside of the will of God. If they're not in harmony with God's will, our intentions, no matter how noble we think they are really actually bad things. There's a verse in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, verses 14, verse 12, that says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to death. That's the result, no matter what our intentions are, if we choose to live our lives and do things that are outside of the will of God. For 100 years or more, our intellectual leaders and our cultural leaders have fed us a diet of lies with respect to truth. We have been told in the modern world for over a century that there is no such thing as absolute truth. And they are wrong. We can see it all around us in the wreckage of a society where politically, emotionally, economically, culturally, you can see that we're living in the midst of a slow motion train wreck. There is no safety in living in this lie outside of God's will. And so the time has come for all of us to step outside of the darkness and into the light. We need to value truth for the treasure that it truly is, to seek for it as a pearl of great price, to never be satisfied until we have found the truth. In John, the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus makes a profound statement. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is the gateway. Jesus is the path. Jesus is the great shepherd. Jesus is the truth. And we should commit ourselves to getting to know Jesus Christ in his truth, who he is, how he lived, what he did, and what he has commanded us to do. For it is only when we live within his will that there is any safety. And when we commit ourselves to him in this manner, our lives will become a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. He deserves nothing less. And anything less is simply a waste of time that leads to death. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jim Higgins, and this is Reflecting on Truth. If you found this message compelling, please subscribe to my channel and click the like button and perhaps share it. Thank you again for joining me. Have a great day.